So, Jon, you've spent a big chunk of your career helping NBC use sports to build out a portfolio of content and programming that has made NBC an absolute powerhouse network in every sense of the word. So in this conversation, I do want to get into really the art of media rights acquisition and programming, particularly as it stands today with all these different channels, OTT products and connected devices coming into the market. And of course, obviously the most obvious step for you guys more recently with the addition of Peacock to the mix. So I'm going to start with a real easy one for you. And what is sort of the big picture sports content philosophy for NBC and its different channels?
Well, it's interesting. Our business has changed and evolved so much. I've had a front row seat for it. When I first started in the business, people like to kid me that it was black and white television, but not quite that far back. But it's true that it was just NBC, CBS, and ABC when I first got into the business. And now, our competitors number in the hundreds, if not more than that, and choices and convenience have flipped the equation. It used to be that a programmer, which is what I do, would be able to dictate, when and where someone would have to consume the media. We'd put it on a television network, we'd put it on a cable network, and people would have to make an appointment to find it and watch it. Sports don't really work as a taped product, so that's the benefit of being live and having appointment television. But what's changed so much and has really rapidly changed in the last 3 to 5 years is that the advent of streaming and convenience for the viewer. So the equation has flipped to where now the viewer chooses when and where they want to consume product, not the programmer or the network. So because of that and because of the advent of technology, we've had to be, responsive to that. So when we go out and acquire content and acquire programming, we have several different qualifiers or metrics that we use. Obviously, we wanted to achieve a wide audience because we're serving oftentimes 3, if not 4 different masters. We've got your television audience, the partner who you're in business with. If you're talking about distribution, either from the cable side or the broadcast side, and now you're talking about subscribers from the streaming side. So you've got, all these different people or different groups that you have to be focused on when you go out and acquire content. Clearly, with the advent of streaming, the audience is considerably younger, oftentimes much more affluent. So you try to find products and properties that will fit into that puzzle. And while there are a lot of product and there's an enormous amount of content that's out there that's available, not all of it makes sense for what we're trying to achieve. So things that are important to us are obviously big audiences, diverse audiences and younger audiences that are upscale, upper educated, that advertisers are looking for, that will generate high unit rates and what they call high CPMs. Exclusivity is very important when you can get it. You can't always get it, but when you can get it, it adds even more value to the equation. And then, the time of day and convenience to watch product. I'll give you an example. Wimbledon and the French Open are wonderful properties in the world of Grand Slam tennis because they take place in either the UK or Paris, but at the time they air here in the mornings in the US, they don't have a lot of competition and they feature the best of the best. The Australian Open, which is a fine tournament, takes place in Melbourne in late January, but unfortunately it happens in the middle of the night. So American advertisers and American consumers and American viewers have less of an opportunity to enjoy that product. They may watch it on tape, but that won't carry the same value as a live program would. So as a result, the Australian Open pales in comparison with what they can command in this marketplace versus, say, Roland Garros or, say, Wimbledon, or you can transfer that to other properties in the golf space or whatever. Same problem happens with the rugby. We do Six Nations rugby here, which is a tremendous rugby product, and rugby is catching on in a big way in the U.S. We have the World Cup and a bunch of other rugby content. But then you look at something like Sanzar, which is equally as good and equally as popular in terms of its competition and the level of play from the All Blacks and the Springboks and you name it. But the problem is they take place in that hemisphere, and the time zones just don't work over here. So as a result, they're not going to command the same type of attention, focus, and investment that some other sports would.
Yeah, and it seems to be a lot of it is related to, you talk about exclusivity, and it does seem like from outside in at least, NBC is really focused on having that sort of exclusivity factor in most of its rights packages that it seems to acquire. Where does that really provide the value for you? Is it across the board in terms of whether it's advertisers really want, it's just a ratings game, I suppose, that you just want to make sure you've got at least tentpole moments that people are attracted to, or is it more than that?
Yeah, ratings are a big part of it, but having exclusivity means you have much more control over your marketplace. So you're not competing with someone who might have a different agenda. You might look at a 24-hour sports network that has an enormous amount of content. ESPN is a perfect example, and they are a wonderful example of having really good content from a lot of different properties. But because they have so much content and they have so much sports, they may not focus as much on selling some of their sports at a premium or packaging them up in a way that you would if you had something exclusively. And you look at the properties that we have exclusively, whether that's something like the Tour de France or the Premier League or the Triple Crown in horse racing or Notre Dame football in college football, and you're able to control a lot more of that model. And the best example of that is the Olympics. The Olympics is the single biggest property in sports and entertainment. And because NBC controls it exclusively in this country on any platform currently existing or to be created in the future, it enables our sales folks and our marketing folks to go out and put together a very compelling package to partners and enables them to invest in the Olympics in a way that really satisfies what they want to achieve as well. So whether it's a soft drink or a credit card or an automotive or a financial services company or a technology company, they know that they can get their message in that Olympics across all these different platforms and really be much more effective. And for us, having exclusivity means that when we go out and package and price something, we're not at the mercy of somebody who might be lowballing or putting a much more discounted price on it, because for them, the sales equation might not be as important in their thinking and their strategy.
And that makes particular sense, obviously, for the linear sort of part of the business. But when Peacock comes in the mix, and I'm guessing that does change a little bit of that dynamic. You're trying to move slightly different needles. You're not looking at it explicitly through the lens of what advertising might bring to the table, but obviously there's a wider play there. How different do you look at it when you're looking at it from the Peacock lens
Peacock
versus the
wider? Peacock is a great
example
because Peacock is an AVOD service, so it's subscriber based, but it also has advertising. It's one of the reasons why it's such a valuable streaming service, because it's much lower priced than the other streaming services and because the advertising is a part of it. So you do have to think about that. But what you also think about with Peacock is you don't necessarily need to overload the different properties you have, because at some point you reach a point of diminishing returns. So we made a big play for the Premier League because we feel that the Premier League is the number one soccer league in the world. We don't want to be the network of soccer. We want to be the network of the Premier League. And that's a big strategic initiative for us. But there are a lot of other great soccer properties out there, whether it's Serie A, La Liga, the Bundesliga, Ligue 1, Liga MX, you name it. But adding those properties wouldn't necessarily raise the number of Peacock subscribers the way adding a sport like baseball would. By adding baseball now, you're attracting a whole new audience to Peacock that might not otherwise be there. With the Premier League, you have your base soccer audience, but now you can bring in a baseball audience. And adding in the Open Championship and the U.S. Open in golf does the same thing, because now you're bringing in a new golf audience. So those kind of aggregations of audiences really are what make Peacock valuable. And what also happens here is there's what's called a halo effect. So the person who buys Peacock for the Premier League may stick around and watch IndyCar racing, may end up watching the Indianapolis 500 on Peacock, or they may consume some NASCAR programming, or they may consume the WWE, or more likely, they're going to watch some of the original entertainment programming that the Peacock Entertainment Group and the NBC Universal Entertainment Group are producing, like Bel Air, or like a Universal movie like Marry Me, or watching reruns of The Office. So that halo effect from that Premier League subscriber or that golf subscriber then translates to all those other divisions. So we have this special sauce at NBC called Symphony, which has been around for now 11 years, where all the different parts of the company come together to help the other parts of the company. And that's very, very important that we check egos at the door, and we understand that if we help others successful, then we can all be successful. And that's one of the reasons why I think Peacock has had such dramatic growth in such a short period of time. It's only been around really for 2 years, and it's already, doing incredibly well.
So leaning into that last bit, you talked about the ability to work with each other within the wider business to work out what the best strategy is for these sort of premium content opportunities. Are there specific things you're making decisions on then around the Peacock versus wider NBC? Where something should sit specifically?
Yeah, I mean, there will be examples where everything that airs on NBC broadcast now can also air on Peacock, and that's because of the close relationship we have with our 230 NBC affiliates and owned stations. But there's a lot of content that we acquire that is exclusive for Peacock. So the Premier League is a great example. There are 380 Premier League fixtures over the course of a season. It's a 10-month season. It basically goes from August until May. And you have, June and July are the two off months, and then they come back again in August, obviously. But of those 380 fixtures, you're going to have almost half of those fixtures be on Peacock exclusively, no place else. And you're also going to have a lot of what we call the Big Six matchups, the Big Six versus Big Six. So a Liverpool United or an Arsenal Chelsea game won't necessarily always be on linear television. Some of those games will also appear exclusively on Peacock, and so that Peacock subscribers are getting real value for their investment. And it also helps drive overall, exposure for the Premier League. It gets the Premier League younger. It gets people to watch who really want to watch and consume for 2 hours of a Premier League game, but then they also get to see all the shoulder programming. So whether that's Rebecca Lowe hosting with Robbie Earle and Robbie Mustoe Premier League mornings, or watching, a match of the day feature that we do, and we do Premier League downloads that our producers put together. There's all that additional Premier League content over and above what you might see on linear television. So the Premier League lives several different places in the NBC universe. It appears on NBC on broadcast. We'll have 25 to 30 games on NBC. We'll have games on USA, which is our cable network, which is a combination of entertainment and sports programming. We'll have, as I said, close to half the games will be on Peacock. And then on Championship Sunday, we'll utilize a bunch of other NBC linear cable networks to show other Premier League games all going on at the same time. And I think for the first time between Manchester City and Liverpool, we may come down to that final weekend, which will be tremendous.
It will indeed. So you've mentioned the Premier League deal, which is a very interesting deal. It's a fairly recent deal that had a huge increase and bump in the investment into those rights, and caught a lot of interest from the wider industry that took place. But there's some other deals that have been happening as well that you've used particularly for the Peacock business. Mainly, the first one that comes to mind, we talk about a lot across the industry, is the WWE deal you did, which is, I mean, you can give us a bit more detail, but 5 years, I think the reported numbers are 5 years, $1 billion. They shut down their they shut down their US live content platform, and you guys move it and shift it all into the Peacock proposition. The first reports on numbers in terms of audience seem to be really, really strong. So I'm just curious how you got to that decision, because that is, firstly, it's quite a different proposition to what we typically see in the traditional live sports rights negotiations. So how did you get there in the first place?
Well, we had a long history with the WWE. The McMahon family and NBC have had a long relationship. They happen to be right around the corner from where I'm sitting in Stamford, Connecticut. Their offices are right here. So I can actually look out my window and see their flag on top of the WWE building. But we recognize that that's a huge, passionate audience. And one of the interesting things in streaming that you have to always be careful of is people will come in and then check back out. Well, the nice thing about the WWE is that they have so much content. They have so much library content. It's so well produced. It's so entertaining. It builds stars. And there's a pay-per-view product literally almost every month. So it really has all of the necessary ingredients to be a successful streaming property. And they also knew, because we had this rich relationship with the WWE and USA, which had been, running Raw for so long, that we were going to treat the property well. And so whether it was Vince McMahon or now Stephanie McMahon and the people who run the WWE now, they had a good comfort level with all of the senior management here at NBC that we would take their property and treat it well. And it's worked out well for them, obviously, and it's worked out very well for Peacock.
But the concept of actually taking and closing down their platform, I mean, their platform was seen by many as one of the market leaders, right, for live content that they were producing.
Right. I think what it did, it took them out of a business that they didn't necessarily want to stay in. It was a very labor-intensive business. It required a lot of investment of both resources, financial and people. They could plug into a business that was already established here. They could capitalize and reap the benefits of all the hard work they had done for the past 30 or so years and pull some money out. So there are a lot of reasons why they made their decision. I can't tell you all the thinking behind it, but they're still running a very, very successful promotion business, and their product has never been stronger or better.
So the obvious question a lot of people in the industry are asking, and they're seeing it looks like it's been a winner. Why won't more do it? Why won't we see more sports properties really lean into a real dedicated relationship? I'm guessing the economics have something to do with that. But do you expect to see more of these types of deals being done?
I think that's a good question. I think that you might see that. I mean, the two great examples are the Premier League and the WWE. Both of them have achieved enormous success and growth by casting their lot, with us, because in a lot of ways we're one-stop shopping for them here. We have the benefit of the NBC, broadcast platform for promotion, but we have the benefit of NBC's production, marketing, technological expertise, which really helps deliver a good, solid product to a wide audience. A lot of people are worried about whether or not their stuff is going to crash. We were the first streaming company ever to stream the Super Bowl. We streamed the Olympics in 2012. So we've been way ahead of the curve on a lot of this stuff, and we have the people in place who've learned from it. We've made a lot of mistakes, Nick. Don't get me wrong. It hasn't always been smooth sailing. But the good part is we've learned from a lot of those, I don't want to say screw-ups, but just from, having to handle simultaneous streams for something like the Super Bowl or the Olympics, and the different things you have to institute technically, that's really helped us. And so companies look and say, wow, if I'm going to cast my lot with NBC, then I know that my property is going to be treated well, it's going to be produced well, it's going to be sold at a premium, they're going to help me grow my brand, they're going to be concerned about me as a partner. And that's important to a lot of properties. Now, it's not for everybody. There are some properties that have so much product and so much volume that they're never going to be able to go with just one service. The NFL is a perfect example. The NBA is a perfect example. They've just got so much content out there that that no one entity is ever going to be able to handle it all and do justice for it all. So when you're a property like that, you have to decide what's best for you. And at NBC, we evaluate each property on its merits, but we have all these different grading points that we use.
That's so you set it up as sort of a really good question for me that I'm constantly asking a lot of people in the industry is about the fragmentation situation. That sports rights now, as you said, there's a lot more competitors innately in the content space or the platform space as well. And as a result, MLB, you guys have just announced a deal with them, which is a really interesting deal, which I'll get you to tell us a bit more about in a second. But they are really sort of leaning into this fragmentation bit for the benefit of trying to be, get more value out of their media rights, I'm sure, but also discoverability and reaching wider audiences, I imagine. Obviously, there's some pros and cons in that. Pros, more money, more reach. Negatives, probably an impact on the fan base if you have to go to one of 6 providers or so to access the content. And I don't necessarily see at the moment how that's going to improve that fragmentation side for the near future, because there's going to be more and more coming to the market unless we see a gross set of mergers and aggregation coming into the play. What do you guys see that? Obviously, you have done some deals which sort of do mitigate that a lot. You're bringing in Premier League into one home, WWE to one home. Do you see the fragmentation thing being a big problem in our industry?
Well, I think it's something you have to be aware of, and the leagues acknowledge it. I think the baseball deal is interesting. I give Rob Manfred and the folks at baseball an enormous amount of credit because they've looked down the road. They see what the future is. Baseball has an enormous amount of content that they can spread around. They were not able to achieve the huge increases from linear broadcasters that they had gotten in the past, and that's not uncommon. When a sport kind of gets saturated at the linear basis, they've got to look for alternatives. They're a sport that needs to get younger, and obviously streaming is a much younger, focused opportunity. So now you see baseball has games on Apple. They have games on Peacock. They have games on Amazon in certain markets. So I think they're recognizing this early, that they might have had to sacrifice some larger audiences and possibly wasted circulation instead for more targeted circulation. Our baseball deal, we're very excited about because we're, using a window that traditionally baseball has not been played in. It's one of the reasons why the Premier League was so successful, because by having games on at 7:30 and 10 o'clock in the morning here, you weren't competing with other sports programming. Our baseball package, which is basically going to lead off the day on Sundays, those games are going to be at 11:30. Now, some of these players who played on Saturday night may not love the idea of having to get out of bed early Sunday morning and get to the ballpark by 8 or 8:30 to get dressed and go out and take BP. But the long and short of it is, I think it's going to be a good result for baseball, because I think you're going to have an opportunity to get the NBC promotional machine behind it. I will tell you, baseball really is in the walls here at NBC. And we had baseball from the 1940s all the way up until the time we lost it in 1990. Got it back in 1995 for 5 years, but we haven't had baseball on NBC for over 20 years. And baseball had a really rich, robust history here. As a kid growing up, it's the sport I fell in love with, the game of the week. I remember watching baseball every Saturday afternoon with my dad, and I loved the game, and I loved NBC's broadcast, whether it was Curt Gowdy and Joe Garagiola and, some of these great iconic memories that I have of baseball, and it's somewhat of a romantic view, but I think having it back on NBC is going to be good for baseball. We're going to launch our package on Sunday, May 8th, which is the Sunday after the Kentucky Derby. So we'll use the Kentucky Derby window to help promote baseball coming back to NBC. And then we have 18, games over the course of the summer that I think are going to be obviously very well produced and well promoted. And I think people will find it, and we're excited about it.
So yeah, that deal's interesting. Obviously, I think it's something like 18 exclusive games on the Sunday morning, if I remember correctly, with the first
Correct.
one being broadcast on your main channel. I'm curious just on that
So we're going to simul stream. That's what it's called. We
Okay.
kind of made that word up, but it's being simul. That first game will be simul streamed on NBC and on Peacock, and then after that, all the other games will be exclusively on Peacock.
Mm-hmm. And just curious on that, why would you do that? It's just an awareness thing, opportunity just to create awareness that your broadcast
Right.
is
It's
coming
to
to
kind of get
market.
the message out there to let people know that baseball's back on NBC. I'm personally, I am so excited to have baseball back. I mean, I love the sport. I've always loved the sport. I think it gets a bad rap sometimes from people who just don't understand it and follow it, but it is a wonderful sport played by very talented individuals, and I'm excited that it's back on NBC.
So into the whole the right space again. I'm just curious now. We have seen the evolution of some of these media rights processes over the years become a lot more legal, a lot more formulaic. I'm just curious from your perspective, how complex are the media rights journeys now to secure versus what they were, say, I don't know, let's say 10, 20 years ago?
It's come a long way from what we used to call a napkin of intent. The napkin of intent came out of, a rights holder and a broadcaster getting together over lunch, writing down the different terms on a napkin and agreeing to those terms, and then having some lawyer back in your office draw them up, and you'd go back and forth, and it would be a 2-page or a 3-page document, and it would be pretty simple. Nowadays, the documents are this thick because they involve so many different things, whether they're domestic rights or international rights or global rights, whether they're just broadcast, how long you can have them for, what kind of replay rights you have, what kind of integration rights you have, what kind of activation rights you have, what kind of rights you have to logos and marks and IP, what kind of sales responsibilities you have, what kind of promotional commitments you're making. What happens, quite honestly, this is a new one that just happened in the past 2 years. What happens if you have season interruptus? If you have something like COVID that shuts down your season and you lose games, how are you compensated for the loss of games? How do they make those games up? What happens if there's a work action? So many sports now have very strong labor and collective bargaining agreements, but you could end up with a work stoppage. How does that affect you? So, and then you have a situation like you had in soccer where you have a rival league, or you have something what's happening in golf now where you have a potential rival league out there. So how do you address those issues? So what used to be, as I used to call it, the napkin of intent, has turned into an epic, you know, book that's oftentimes 50 to 100 pages long. Fortunately for us and for the leagues, we have very good, very well-trained attorneys who are used to this, who are adept at this. Another new area that we never contemplated in the past was piracy. Okay. So you have a situation where you're putting games on, you're paying for those games, but if somebody comes in and takes those games illegally, either from you and puts them someplace else, or from someplace else and affects your market, how do you deal with those things? So these are all the different things that go into, rights negotiations and stuff like that. So there's very spirited conversations back and forth, but it all gets worked out.
It's interesting. I mean, I'm curious. You obviously always hear these days, when the reporting comes out on these deals, most of the focus is on the number, right? The price tag. But I'm just curious, all those the complexity that goes into the deal, the additional investment that broadcasters have to make sometimes in terms of the marketing, the shoulder content, etc. When the scale of these deals. Is that where most of the time still gets stuck on? Is it the price, or is the whole picture where you're working
at
through?
the end of the day, as they say, cash is king. But you will have situations where a league will see the overall value, and a great example of that is the Premier League. The Premier League could have gotten potentially more money from other places, but they saw how NBC had grown the value of the league and what we were putting against it, and how we were together growing the property and the value of the league for those 20 owners and the owners that are yet to come into the league and whatnot. But at the end of the day, price certainly drives the value. With with something like the NFL or the NBA or even the NHL in this country, you have a lot of new owners who have bought into teams, and debt service and what they've paid for those teams is very important to them. And the biggest source of revenue for almost all of them are their media deals. So when you buy, a Major League Baseball team, when you buy a Major League Soccer team, when you buy an NBA team or an NHL team, you're going to want to know what the potential is for media revenue, because that's going to determine how much you're going to make and how quickly you're going to be able to pay down your debt, and where you're going to be able to invest your money, either in stadiums or facilities or players, and how your team is going to remain competitive.
Leaning into particularly with streaming, but also just the extra data you're now able to get around audiences and audience consumption, which you didn't necessarily have as much. You were relying on different sources back over the last 10, 20 years. One of the things we've seen over in the UK, in particular in say Sky Sports, one of your sort of sister-ish businesses, I guess you call it a sister business, was their shift to specific sports channels, which I talked to Jonathan Licht actually on this podcast a few weeks ago, who's the MD there, and he talked about the benefit that's had for their business by being, I guess, from a communications and marketing standpoint, as much as anything, be able to really communicate to audiences, this is what you get. You've got the golf channel, you've got the F1 channel, you've got all these other channels in place. If you like these sports, this is the home for you. The flip side of that seems to be, though, that because of this intelligence, you're able to get on what audiences are interested in, that perhaps let's say the tier 2, 3, 4 sports properties that don't move the needle for a big broadcaster, but may have been acquired in the programming mix to fill out the schedule a little bit and so forth, basically being a little bit more left out of the picture because they're not really providing value. Are you guys seeing that?
Yeah, I think you do see that down the road, and I think that's an issue that's going to really become exacerbated in the next 5 to 10 years. Those properties that deliver audiences and value and ratings will continue to command high, rights fees and big exposure and stuff like that. Those sports that are good sports that have passionate audiences will not get that same type of exposure, and will have to find alternative ways to generate revenue in order to stay alive. I think one of the things with the Olympic sports, those Olympic sports are tremendous, but you only see them every 4 years in the Olympics. And so we took it upon ourselves through the Olympic Channel and through Olympic digital efforts to really showcase swimming, diving, gymnastics, curling, et cetera. But those sports, will lose those platforms, over time, and they've got to work to stay relevant, as opposed to the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, the Premier League, NASCAR. Those sports that continue to deliver those big, large audiences will continue to attract, investment and value.
No, it makes complete sense, and I think that's what everyone's seeing across the industry. I'm curious, though, with the growth of OTT and every sports property either has a direct-to-consumer offering or is set to launch a direct-to-consumer offering, do you see that as being an avenue for them to come back into the mix down the line? Be able to prove that they have an audience, and that much smaller deals like the WWE deal on a much smaller scale could be on the table if you could plug them into, say, the Peacock offering?
I think that they will. I think that the streaming platform and direct to consumer really enables those sports to survive, but whether or not they can grow or not is going to be up to them. They're going to get their core audiences to come and follow them, but one of the beauties of having a relationship with a bigger media company is that the wider growth you have in getting the casual sports fan there. I think that's what we see has happened with the Premier League. We were able to get the casual sports fan to become a Premier League fan, not necessarily a soccer fan, but a Premier League fan. One of the reasons why the Kentucky Derby is the highest rated program in the second quarter every year, for basically 2 minutes of racing, it gets, almost 15 hours of exposure, but we're bringing in casual fans who are not diehard horse racing fans, but they love the pageantry and the celebration and the excitement and everything that goes into the Kentucky Derby. And that's all about storytelling. And we have, in Mike Tirico, we have the single best storyteller in the business. and we have great production behind it. And that's what makes our horse racing so valuable. And that Kentucky Derby experience now will extend to the Preakness, it'll extend to Royal Ascot, it'll extend to the Breeders' Cup, so that people will become familiar with trainers and jockeys and horses and owners, so that the horse racing business, which has always been a very insular business, now is open to a lot more people. And it's one of the reasons why we think that there are certain sports out there that have some real upside. And I've talked about the sport of rugby, which quite honestly, we weren't that familiar with until rugby became an Olympic sport. After the Olympic meetings in 2009, rugby sevens got into the Olympics, but rugby was around long before professional football was around. But, the American sevens rugby team is very competitive. The American 15s rugby team is becoming more and more competitive. There's a good chance that the United States will be the home of the Rugby World Cup in 2031. Hopefully, the United States rugby group takes on the same model that Japan did when they were awarded the Rugby World Cup rights for 2019, build their program and put on an incredibly successful program then. And I'm hoping the same thing happens here. But I think that rugby is one of those sports that attracts both men and women. You don't need a lot of equipment. It's not an expensive sport to play. It teaches all these great life values. Athletically, it's very demanding, but it teaches great sportsmanship and integrity. And I think those are the kind of sports that Americans will gravitate towards. So there's an opportunity to take a sport like rugby and really grow it. And we've seen that with Six Nations and some of the other Olympic rugby that we've done.
That last point on rugby is obviously a really interesting one, particularly in a market like the US, where if you were to partner up with a rugby organization, you instantly expand their reach, their audience, all the commercial opportunities that would be in front of them, or any sports if they're at sort of that lower tier that are looking for a step up. And obviously it's got to work. It's got to work for everyone. But I'm just curious. We're seeing more and more organizations partner up with each other. An example, I guess, recently at a sort of a high level is the Discovery PGA Tour deal with Golf TV and their rights coming together and actually having a bit of a joint venture in place. So I'm just wondering, do you think you'll start to see more of that come into play, where there's going to be, instead of just being a transactional, well, I know it's more than a transaction, but a transactional relationship ultimately on media rights and building out a strategy there, to becoming more of a partnership and a joint venture with money being transacted?
I mean, I think we enjoyed a very strong partnership, and we helped launch something here in the U.S. called the Premier Lacrosse League, which we did on NBC for 3 years. It's now gone over to ESPN, largely because we just didn't have the windows to give them like we used to. But that started out, that was a transactional relationship when we started, and we put on a lot of games on NBC Sports Gold, shared revenue with them, and so we had a mutual incentive for growing the sport. So I think that's out there, and that's possible with certain properties where those properties will need the investment and support of a media partner. There are other properties out there that are so strong and deliver so much value that they don't need to do that. So I think it's going to depend on where the sport sits in the hierarchy.
So, Jon, something else on the horizon for you is your new partnership with Fox on this new venture around professional football. Could you just talk us through what's coming?
Sure. So there have been several attempts in this country to launch spring football, because the appetite for professional football in this country, as you know, is huge with the NFL and even college football, which is a big sport here. And we've looked at several different opportunities and have chosen to steer clear. And then about a year ago, the folks at Fox reached out, and we have a good working relationship with them on the WWE, on NASCAR, and some other stuff that we've done. And they came to us with this idea of launching a new version of the USFL. And we were very intrigued about it. But I was, really very adamant that we couldn't launch this league until after Augusta, that we had to make it a true spring league and not launch it like a lot of these other leagues have tried to launch right after the Super Bowl, which I thought was a recipe for disaster. And they agreed, and so we've been working long and hard with the folks at Fox and our internal people, and we'll launch this coming Saturday in Birmingham, Alabama, with 8 teams. The first game is this Saturday night. Both NBC and Fox will air the game live. It's the first time that there's been a regularly scheduled broadcast of the same event on 2 different networks since the first Super Bowl in 1967. There are 8 teams. They'll each play 10 regular season games, so there'll be 40 regular season games divided equally among Fox and NBC. And then we'll have 2 semifinal games and a championship, which will be played in Canton, Ohio. But what I think is interesting is that we've made some rule changes here in conjunction with the NFL. We'll be using NFL officials. It'll look very much like professional football, like people at home are used to. As sports betting has become more and more popular here in close to 30 states, there'll be a lot of betting on this. And we think it's a really unique way to launch a new league from scratch with 2 partners who have a lot invested in it. So it'll be fun to watch, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if this model works. I think of all the football models that I've seen, this one has the best chance of success.
Why do you think that? Outside of the broadcasting weight that NBC and Fox will bring this, which is pretty massive, and will give it the exposure that will accelerate.
Well, I think
what else
we've brought in
some
recognizable coaches. There's no shortage of talent out there. There's no shortage of athletes who can play professional football at a very high level. The question is giving them the opportunity, giving them the coaches, and putting them in the right environment to succeed. They've been in training camp for the past several weeks working, to get ready for this launch. I think that, waiting 3 months after the NFL has helped a lot. People miss football. And the other thing is that as other sports have kind of abandoned their exposure platforms, hockey is one example where they put so many games on streaming and came off of linear television, that you've given, there's a big opening here for this kind of product. So we think, all that combined with good quality football with some interesting rule changes that people will enjoy at home with some real good technology. You're going to have 2 sky cams. You're going to have drone footage. You're not going to have chain gangs on the side for measuring first down. You'll use video technology for that. So I think a lot of those things people will sit at home and really get into it.
And I guess it's going to be a bit of a test bed then for a lot of the broadcast innovation that we're seeing, right?
This will be a petri dish for, not only rule changes, but technology. We're grooming new officials. We're bringing a lot of people along. It's also an opportunity with 8 teams for a lot of people who want to get into the sports business. It's a new league that's starting from scratch. So it's a way to open up new opportunities for people to get into the business. So I'm excited about it. I've worked long and hard with the group at Fox, and our production people are ready to go, and we've got our fingers crossed.
What's it like working with other broadcasters?
Well, we work with everybody. We're like Switzerland in that case. We're competitors, but the term is frenemies, right? So we're competitors when it comes to rights, but we share the PGA Tour rights with CBS. We share the NASCAR rights with Fox. We obviously all have NFL football, NBC, Fox, CBS, ESPN, ABC. So we work together, but we've had a good working relationship with the Fox team for a long time. We took over the USGA package for them a couple years ago. It's a good working relationship, and we both are respectful of each other. We're both, our production teams work very well together. So I think it's a good way to do business. You don't have to constantly be beating each other's brains out. And quite honestly, our competition isn't necessarily the broadcasters anymore. Our competition includes them, but it also includes the streamers and the D2Cs and stuff like that. So we have to find a way to work with everybody.
One question that's been on the lips of a lot of people over in Europe and UK in particular is seeing all these major moves happening in the streaming space in the US. I mean, it's moving at such a rapid rate, and sports does seem to sit at the heart of it. What's Peacock's plans outside of the US? Are you able to share anything there with us?
I think, Peacock does have some international aspirations. I think it'll start small with content that we control and own, like news and some of the entertainment programming that we own the IP for. And then as we grow into different territories, we'll look to acquire more international rights and make Peacock more of a global service. But I think the NBC brand is a global brand. And I think that's going to help give comfort to both consumers and rights holders that when NBC takes on that property, that it'll be treated well and that will help them grow. And I think that's one of the things that we're known for and that I'm particularly proud of. And I learned this at an early stage in my career from Dick Ebersol and then Mark Lazarus and now Pete Bavacqua, who runs NBC Sports, is that to be a good partner, you really have to put yourself in the shoes and the place of the people you're doing business with and understand how to help them grow their business. And if you can figure out a way to do that, you'll have long-term successful relationships. And that's one of the things that we pride ourselves on.
Understood. And one final question for you I have to ask is I looked up your bio before we spoke, and I looked at that you've been involved with creating a number of events. And one of them was the National Dog Show, the PNC Father-Son and the PNC Championship, and amongst a whole host of others. How did you get to a point where you started creating dog events whilst doing these billion-dollar deals with rights holders for their sports rights?
I would love to tell you it came out of this inspirational thing, but necessity is the mother of invention, Nick. And when the dog show story is a fun story, and so is the PNC Championship and the Winter Classic in hockey. They all came as a result of us having to walk away from another property. So in the case of the dog show, we had lost the NFL after the 1999 season. And so the NFL was a big property for NBC for a long time, but we were out of that business. And so Thanksgiving Day, which had always been a big football day on NBC, we were airing the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade in the morning. And then we were airing a movie with Jimmy Stewart called It's a Wonderful Life in the afternoon. And we had run it every year for like 2 or 3 years, and it didn't really perform a whole lot. And the story goes that, in January of 2002, this is now our 3rd year without the NFL, and I was in NFL withdrawal. My wife brought home the movie from Blockbuster. I don't know how many people who are watching or listening remember Blockbuster, but she brought home the movie Best in Show with one of my favorite characters, Eugene Levy and Catherine O'Hara and whatnot. And we had a bunch of friends over and we watched Best in Show and we thought it was hysterical. And so I came into work on that Monday morning after that weekend, and I asked one of the fellows who was working with us to see if he could find out for me what the second oldest dog show in America was. And I had an idea. And he came back into me about an hour later and he says, well, the second oldest dog show in America is the Westminster Kennel Club, because I had always thought they were the oldest. I said, well, if they're the second oldest, what's the oldest? He says, well, the oldest is the Kennel Club of Philadelphia. And I said, well, how much older? They said, well, they're 5 years older. I said, are they still around? He says, well, there's a phone number for them on the internet. So I said, okay, let me have the number. So I picked up the phone and I called and I reached a man named Wayne Ferguson, who was the CEO of the Kennel Club of Philadelphia. And I introduced myself to him, and I think he thought it was a crank call. And I said, no, it's actually a very serious call. Would you ever have interest in putting your dog show on television? And he said, yeah, let's talk about it. So I said, okay. And then I called a friend of mine who I had done business with at Purina, Michael Crawford, who was shut out of the Westminster Kennel Club because they at that time were sponsored by Pedigree, by a rival dog food company. And I said, Michael, would you ever be interested in sponsoring a dog show if I could ever get a dog show put on NBC? And he said, John, if you can get a dog show on NBC, Purina will be there. I said, okay, sit tight. So now I had a dog show and now I had a sponsor. I went down to Philadelphia, made an arrangement to get that. And then I went in to see my boss at the time, was Dick Ebersol, who was a brilliant, just a terrific, producer, you name it, executive. And I came to him with this idea, and he basically wanted to throw me out of his office. And he said, John, we've lost the NFL. We're out of the baseball business. Who knows if we're going to stay in the NBA? People are going to write that NBC Sports is going to the dogs. And I said, Dick, I don't think we're going to we're going to brand it NBC Sports. We'll just brand it NBC. He said, well, where would you run this dog show? I said, I want to run it on Thanksgiving Day instead of It's a Wonderful Life, and put it on right after the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. And he looked at me, and I had come to Dick with a lot of crazy ideas. And he said, you know what? That's not a bad idea. Let's talk to the CEO. So we talked to the CEO of the company. And they said, well, it can't do any worse, right, than It's a Wonderful Life. And I said, probably not. So we put it on. It's a Wonderful Life had done a 1 rating, and that first dog show did a 7.5 rating and beat every primetime show out there on any of the 3 networks. And so, 20 years later, 21 years later, it's thriving. So of all the things that I've done in my career, a lot of stuff I'm very proud of and happy to be associated with. That's the one that's going to, lead my epitaph, I think. But that's okay. I'm happy. I'm a dog lover, so it's okay.
That's an incredible story, and just shows what a good idea can turn into if you follow it through. And just watching some good TV can make happen. It's been really good talking with Jon. That's been a really insightful conversation, and really great to learn a bit more about what you're doing over there at NBC. And look forward to seeing what is next. Thank you so much for finding the time to join us.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nick.